Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. This is the 397th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. It's very strange to say numbers that big at this point, but we're coming up on our 400th session, and that's very exciting. For those of you who don't know anything about the background of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium, this is a something that evolved essentially out of the Occupy Wall Street action in New York. Years ago, there was an attempt to kind of create a sort of Occupy University to sort of liberate information from the institution and make it freely available to the public. So Ben Ketchwer started this event, this weekly event, the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium, and it sort of evolved over the years. And what it has become is a really exciting weekly speaker series with a wide variety of speakers dealing with comics, visual narrative, and other text image issues. And since COVID came into our lives, it's been kind of a mix of in-person and online, but much more online. And one of the nice things about doing these sessions online is that if they're willing to tolerate a time difference, we're much more easily able to have exciting international guests like today's speaker. Today, I'm extremely thrilled to be hosting tonight's session with Domingos Isabelinho, who is a Portuguese comics critic and scholar. I think many of us over the years have been deeply impressed by Domingos's actual groundbreaking work on his blog, The Crib Sheet. And among, I mean, I can say more about his bio and his recent book, which I'll mention. But one thing I wanted to kind of insert a little personal connection here too, because Domingos, I guess I first got in touch with you probably about 20 years ago to write an article for an online comics magazine I was editing, because even at the time you were like posting just really amazing things online, and you were looking at things from the history of art and areas of culture that many people who, maybe knew a lot about, say American comics and the Western comics tradition didn't know that much about, and I remember one of the things that really intrigued me on the crib sheet that I saw years ago was the work of Roberto Altman, who was part of the letrist movement. And that was probably I'm sure on your blog, the very first time I ever saw those images from his larger book, Geste Hypergraphique. And many years later, I ended up taking a class on the Situationists, which led me to learn a lot more about the letrists. And then, a few years ago here at the symposium, I gave a talk, that included, the letrists and other things from this expanded field that Domingos is going to talk about tonight. And then I was extremely touched to receive a really beautiful note from Domingos saying how much he enjoyed my talk and telling me about his new book. So anyway, I'm really, really glad we're going to be hosting Domingos here at the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. It's a perfect event for me. And as I said, Domingos has a book out. It came out, I guess now, maybe a couple years ago. I still think of it as new because time feels strange to me lately. But your book, The Reading Gaze, collects a lot of your writing on the idea of what you call the expanded field of comics, which you'll be talking about this evening. So I think that's enough introduction from me. Please join me in welcoming Domingos. Domingos, I invite you to, feel free to begin and share your screen whenever you're ready. Thanks for being here tonight, Domingos.
Hey, thank you, Bill, and I want to thank Ben also.
Yes.
I remember I wrote about The Cage by Martin von James, a Canadian artist and writer. It was on the alternative comics site, right?
Indie Comics, yes.
Indie Comics,
it was a
yes.
publication of alternative
Yeah.
comics, yes.
Yes, Indie Comics. And Today I forgot Mind Long James, which is a shame. But I have only a few examples to show, nothing very exhaustive, because as I told on the introduction, in the introduction, the objective is the Cantigas de Santa Maria, right? So let's us begin. Well, this is the cover of my book. Bill was talking about the reading gaze, and as you can see on the excellent cover Joana Pires did for me, and I want to thank Joana and my publisher Marcos Farajota too. Well, there are no cartoonists on this cover, so it's Francisco de Goya, Oxai, and Pablo Picasso and Franz Masserel. Franz Masserel is a special case because um, in a certain way the comics milieu adopted him, accepted him. This wasn't so a few decades ago, of course. Francis Bacon and Otto Dix, which are painters. The reading, this started with a conversation, a discussion that occurred 25, 30 years ago, I don't know, about what comics were, what the first comic was. And in 1989, a group of scholars and comics critics reunited in the Italian city of Lucca. I can cite them, and it was David Pascal, Claude Moliterni, Richard Marshall, Maurice Horn, Vasco Grange, Dennis Gifford, Luís Gasca, Álvaro de Moya, Claudio Bertieri, Rinaldo Traini, and Javier Coma. Some from Europe, a couple from the United States, but the names I cited right now, the Americans have a certain they also traveled to Europe, and they were well known here. So what did they say? This was the first comic, of course. It's the Yellow Kid. In the page is the page from 25 October 25, 1896. Well, I suppose it's the sequence and the balloon. The balloon was very important here. So this was the first comic, and this permitted to 100 years later, in 1996, to say comics are now 100 years old. In the city of Brussels, another group. Oh, I forgot to mention that of those names I cited, Dennis Gifford from England didn't agree, because it was the only one who didn't agree, because he thought that Alice Sloper was the first comic. And we start to see, we begin to see a certain pattern here, a pattern that is a bit nationalistic. So the French want to say Monsieur Jabot, even if the creator Rudolf Töpfer was from Switzerland, but he wrote in French. And then they were Patricia Van Sumeren, Noop Maas, Paul Brevet, Thierry Gorenstein, Hans Ries, Antonio Martin, and David Kunzel. Well, this said Töpfer was the first comics artist, and he created comics. So we went back a couple of decades to 1833 or 1827. An interesting thing about Töpfer is that, well, he understood that when a character needed to run, he would run from left to right. So It's the direction we use when we read the text, of course. And then here Cham, the same sequence. Cham, a French artist, redo some of the stories that Topfer did, and since he used etchings, in the etchings the drawings would be reversed, and then it's a bit strange for us to see the character running right to left. I will say a bit more about that later at the end. Well, David Kunzel, in this interesting, very important book, David Kunzel, who died not so long ago, wrote the early comic strip in 1972 or 73, I believe, and he went even further back to the beginning of the invention by Gutenberg of the press. The most striking example he gave was this by Francis Barlow, the true narrative of the horrid, hellish, popish plot, which, as you can see, has captions, but it has also word balloons. So we are going further back and further back. As an aside, this is the text David Kunzel wrote for Carl and Gary Barks, and when he mentions that his character Uncle Scrooge was a bit more controversial than he intended to be. As we know, David Kunzel translated How to Read Donald Duck by Marxist scholars from Chile. This is just a curio. Well, I could cite other examples from the 19th century, of course, Wilhelm Busch. This was taken from a book that also belonged to Karl Barks, so he knew his Busch, of course. Well, you may ask, what is a SAS page doing here? Well, as we can see, people find their definitions of comics, and then they search for something that corresponds to their definitions. If they say the word balloon is essential, we have the yellow key. If the word balloon is not essential, with the sequence of images is top or if one says that the invention of a comic needs to be printed, and then it's the invention of the printing press. So what is doing this page by SAS, I ask? Well, as you can see, SAS here shows only 3 aspects of one city, which we now know is Dominion. Nothing, there's no balloons, there's even no story. So we always call this a comic now, but if we see this, maybe we don't call it a comic. This is by Jacques Callot. It's the miseries of war, and it did this in the 17th century during the 7 Years' War, the wars of religion of the 17th century. This is maybe the most famous of his etchings. Another one. There are 12 or 13 or something like that. So I really am not against any definition of comics. It's the Yellow Kid was certainly important to start well, comics as a mass medium, comics as something that existed in newspapers and in printing something that was printed and in newspapers and comic books later, of course. Topfer was certainly very important too to start what we can call now the modern comic. So there are certainly important things happening, but my feeling was that, okay, comics can be many things. Comics can have many faces. Comics are not just this one thing, and that's it. And if we go further back, we can find many further back, and not only further back, but looking around us. There are many things that can be called comics or sequence art, or any name we can give these things. Okay, we have graphic novel, of course. Another thing is Goya. Well, but I wanted to arrive to Hiroshige, if you can see here, like Okusai. I could give this example too. What is this? Like Seth's page, this is not a story. This is just, but there are some connections between these images. I can show another one. And the connection is a road to Kaido. For Okusai, it was the Mount Fuji, of course. I call that the locus. In mathematics, it's various points that correspond to any given condition. So in this case, a road, and is engravings along the road, and so this is a book too, of course. Other books, another thing we can consider are, and this is more accepted now than it was some years ago. We can consider the cycle, the engraving cycle or the etching cycle. Mainly engravings, wood engravings. This one was done on leather. It's Destiny by Otto Nuckel, and we can see one here. Maybe you already know all these things, I suppose. Franz Maserel, as I said, he started here to talk about the war theme, like Goya, of course, here in a more naturalistic way, and here in his expressionist later style. He also talked about social issues like poverty, of course, or the war by Otto Dix too. This in a book. He suffered. He was a soldier in World War I, and he published this book in 1923. One of the etchings. Or Max Ernst, we all know this is collages. Is one of them, and in which the series of collages he did predicted in a surrealist way, predicted World War I. This predates World War I. Another group of things I wanted to show are painters and poets. This painter is a Swiss painter, Nicholas Rugg, and he did this. This is a Donald Duck comic without the characters, or here too. This was published in a book. You may know Garfield Without Garfield, which is very funny. It's more or less the same thing. This is a book that was published by an art gallery. This is another by the Museum of Modern Art, Comics Abstraction, and here there are many things, but in a similar idea. Brazilian painter Rivan Neuenschwander did this with pages by Disney Comics published in Brazil. Or to stay in Brazil, Álvaro de Sá, a poet, a visual poet, worked with what constitutes many things from comics, or words, balloons, the panels, of course. And this is one of the books Bill mentioned in one of his talks. Or a gallery artists. This is by Mike Christian Hill, and these memories of his grandfather in World War II. Christian Hill and Mark Staff Brandl, or Auechia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the names well, but they said of themselves that they were they did gallery comics. Or this is very well known. Pablo Picasso did these etchings to add the Spanish Republic. The idea was to cut these images, but he saw a story of Francisco Franco, and when he saw the story, he left the etching as it is. It has two pages, and in the second one we can see already see what would be Guernica. Or another thing is cartoonists, political cartoonists, or in this case, Philip Guston, who is a very well-known painter, and he did a series of drawings about Richard Nixon, poor Richard. When he visited China, of course, or here, it's satirical, of course. If we talk about American president satirized, we have here by Baron Story, a book about Trump. Here's another one. Or Warren Craighead. Talking about cartoonists again, I always like this one. This is one of my favorite artists from Cuba, Chago Armada. This is one of his pages. This is comics, of course, and this is something he did, what we could call abstract comics. Another one. So I'll hand this first part of what I have to say today with Charlotte Solomon. I suppose you know who she was. She died in Auschwitz. Before dying, she drew and wrote this story, the Art of Theater, or I think that's the name. And this is the second part of this is I'm sure that Joanna will do a better job of doing a cover. This is the second part. It says there part one, but it will not be part one. It will be part two. And this time I intend to publish what I wrote about real cartoonists, not not what lives around and before cartoonists. I have here some of my fetishes, so to say. Um, Argentinian on the top left, Argentinian scriptwriter Hector Germano Sterel, which disappeared in 1978. It was a victim of the dictatorship. And British draftsman Tony Ware drew this Western. Matt Marriott or Yoshiharu Tsuge from Japan, or Fred, a French artist, or Guido Buzelli from Italy, or here we have Ivan Lagbe from France too. But I will talk about many others. So let's hope I can start this to do this work that needs to be done. Well, this was the first part. I could talk more about all these things. As I said before, I even forgot The Cage by Martin Vaughan James, or the Letterists, or many other things, of course. But I wanted to concentrate today on what I called medieval comics. So the expanded field could expand around, of course, as I said, to visual poetry, to painting, to gallery comics, to cartoonists, to political cartoonists who once in a while do comics, of course. But if you look further back than Gutenberg, we can see also medieval comics. And here today I will be talking a bit about the Cantigas de Santa Maria from Spain. Well, this is a map of, to give you some context. This is a map of Spain after the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire disappeared, well, we have the Visigoth kingdom, who most part of the Iberian Peninsula, as you can see, part of France. But then the Franks defeated the Visigoths, and they retreated to Mainz, to the Iberian Peninsula. Or the kingdom of the Suevi, as you can see, and the Vandals here in Northern Africa. This is 721. What happened in 711 was that the Muslims invaded the Iberian Peninsula, and we have here in the 8th, 9th, 10th century, everything. They conquered almost all of the Iberian Peninsula, as you can see. And then if we go some centuries later, we can see how there were many wars, of course, between Christians and Muslims, but not all. Religion wasn't really a thing. Of course, all this was political, of course, and Christian kingdoms allied with Muslim kingdoms. But in the end, the realm of Granada was the only thing that remained, of course. And here we have Spain, and I call your attention for the coat of arms, two coats of arms, and Castile was the crown of Castile was the biggest, as you see, and is Castile with the castle, and Leon, the kingdom of Leon, with the lion. And here we have the king Alfonso X. Alfonso X. This is a representation of his court, with musicians on the left, and we have here the poets, supposedly is telling the poets what to write. He has a book here. Well, the stories in this book, which I will show you, it's very large, very heavy. The stories in this book come from many countries, almost all of Europe. So I believe it's not true that it was all written. The versions of the stories, yes, many poets. The language, okay, so the language was Old Galician. I must go back to talk about Galicia. It's here, Galicia. It's the northern part, northwest. And it had the Galician Portuguese. It was a language that Old Galician, the language that gave origin to today's Galician and today's Portuguese. Well, the king here says that a lot of things. He says that he's King of Castile, of Toledo and Leon, Compostela, which is in Galicia, the kingdom of Aragon, until the kingdom of Aragon, Córdoba, Jaén, Sevilla, Murcia. And when he says the Algarve, when he says all these things, it's important to him because he conquered all these territories to the Muslims. Okay, I can show maybe can show the first page. There are 419 poems. This book is composed
Domingos, yeah,
yes?
I was going to say, before you begin describing the page, could you just describe generally what this book is?
That's what I was going to do.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
This book has 419, not this book, there are 4 books. There are this says 195 pages. So there are 419 poems, 353 are miracles. So the Blessed Virgin Mary performed all these miracles, plus some songs of to praise the Holy Virgin Mary. 2 of these books have comics, as you can see in this book, which is near Madrid. But I will continue to read what I wrote here. Also, okay, so one of the books is in Florence, but this one is the biggest is in Madrid, and it's the Códice Rico, the Rich Codex, at the library of the Escorial near Madrid. There's a codex in Florence, which is incomplete, as we will see later, because Alfonso died in 1284. This was done nearly 1274. He died in 1284, so while the book was being created. So the Florence book is incomplete, but it's very interesting, and we will see 4 pages of this Florence book too. The Códice Rico dates from 1274. King Alfonso offered these books to the city of Seville. No one knows exactly who did these books, of course, but maybe some Muslims participated. It is believed that some Muslims or Mozarabic, which were the Christians who lived under Muslim rule, because Muslims didn't care if there were other religions living with them, but they had to pay a tax. They paid tax, and they could be Christians among them. This was called Mozarabic. Well, he offered these books to the city of Seville, maybe because Seville had been a Muslim country, and now it was part of Israel. In 1576, it became part of the Escorial Library, the Florentine Codex, because it was incomplete, was sold, ending up in Florence. It was sold, and I don't know how it ended up there, but it's the market did it was sold various times, I suppose. Well, the cantigas or canticles, if you will, were written in the Old Galician language or Galician Portuguese because it was at the origin of the two languages. Why this is not Castilian, which is the language talked with what we call Spanish, of course, because it was the language of poetry, the language used in the Alfonso's court for poetry. The characters are mostly in profile because the narrative develops from left to right, as we saw in Topfer, of course. That's why I mentioned Topfer and mentioned the characters running from left to right. But not always, and we will see some very interesting exceptions. The narrative develops from left to right. Maybe this explains the profiles in Egyptian painting, but this is a joke, of course. I don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm not an historian either. So let's see. What I chose because of two reasons. One, if it is interesting for the comics language, and two, for the interest in the culture that existed 700 years ago. In the narration of the Virgin's miracles and facing the reader on the songs in honor of the Virgin. There are not many, but the few that exist have not a story. It's just a poem, which was done in music too, because this book has music. And yet, if you go to YouTube, you can hear many musics that exist there. The layout is a 6-panel grid, as you see. It's always this 6-panel grid. I call the attention to the lion and the castle. Of course, what we have seen before, it's the kingdom of the Castile and Leon. The perspective is what I would call a transparent wall, because we can see there's the door here, and then we can see through the wall that was supposed to be here, of course. Towers, doors, and not here, but we are going to see. Oh, it's one here. The horseshoe arches, which came from Byzantium, were passed on to the Visigoths architecture, and then the Muslim architecture, which is what we identify today. Muslims had a very cultural important impact in the Iberian Peninsula of the time. But the horseshoe arch comes from the Visigoths, so it's before the Muslims invaded the Iberian Peninsula. Columns also, and other parts of the architecture divide the space, and sometimes these columns are panels within the panels. Besides what we can call the gutters. The gutters, of course, are these divisions, and the caption function as a gutter too. Of course. So before talking about this page, I found on the internet a text by a musician. I guess he wanted to play these musics, because many musicians do, of course. And he said the following: These songs and their illustrations are fascinating and illuminating. But we are not medieval singers performing for a medieval audience. We now recognize that brutalizing and murdering a woman is not an insignificant detail in the cosmic scheme of things, that theocracy is religious totalitarianism, and that critiques are intellectually invigorating and are intended to promote understanding rather than dangerous heresies worthy of punishment. I think this warning is very apt, very necessary, because with what you are seeing here, and I start with this example, and I could give many more, is simply anti-Semitism. If we approach the Christian character once alone from the Jew, and we can see also 700 years ago the stereotypical nose. And not only that, but not only that, the behavior of this Jew is also stereotypical, because he wants a loan and he asks, okay, I can give you a loan, but only if you give me a guarantee. And he gives the Virgin as a guarantee. He then goes he wins money, and but approaching the date he needed to repay what is debt, and since he wasn't in Constantinople, which is the city, these stories happen all over Europe. He puts the money in a trunk, and this is of course strange, but he puts it on the sea, and the as you can see here, and it arrives at the destiny magically, I suppose, as we can see here. And then the story begins. Most of the stories are in one page, and that's all. But the stories ending in 5 have 2 pages, and the stories ending in 0 are the stories in honor of the Virgin. So it arrives and he hides it. Well, it's a bit of strange to see a Jew and the swastika. The swastika is almost everywhere on these stories, and it's not of course it was 700 years ago. It has nothing to do with Nazism. Another thing I find interesting are the boats. The masts are not vertical, as you can see. And then this says, nothing arrived here, nothing happened. But then he says, let's see if nothing happened. So he is hiding the trunk under his bed. Let's see if nothing happened. And the statue of the Virgin talks and says, you know very well that you have the trunk under your bed, and so he is baptized. He believes in the Christian religion. He is baptized. So there are many stories like this one. Unfortunately, there's also stories against Arabs. Of course, there was a war going on. This page I brought because there's a kind of baseball here. I don't want to bother you with many stories like this, like the last one. So this is just, but let's see if I can tell the story rapidly. They are building the cathedral. They are building the cathedral, which is interesting too, because we see a crane here, and they are working. And so the statue of the Virgin is outside, and because they are going to play. I don't know the rules of this game, of course, but it looks like baseball, of course. And he was going to be engaged, to be married, and not to lose his engaging ring. He puts it on the finger of the Virgin, and he says that she's the most beautiful thing he ever saw, and so he will dedicate his life to the Virgin. But he marries, and here we see a marriage with bread and cups and all that. He forgets what is said to the Virgin, and here they are in bed, but the Virgin says to him, "You promised," and then he becomes an hermit, I suppose. This is very interesting from the comics point of view, because the story is that this night we can see here, instead of going to war with the Muslims, we can see on the fourth panel, he prefers to be to attend the mass. He attends the mass, as we can see here. Then his squire warns him, "There's a war going on, you should go," but he doesn't go. But then again, he feels, "Oh, I should go," and he goes. But here we can see a device used in modern comics, which is the night is divided between two panels, as we can see here. But there's a reason. There's a reason, not only I don't know, something static or something like that. There's a reason for the night to be in two panels at the same time, because he was at two places at the same time. It was at the mass, and the Virgin put him also on the battle. So he was really at two places at the same time. And when he repents and he goes to war, the Christian warriors were coming from the battle and said, "Oh, you did well," and then he looks at him and he sees that he's wounded, and he understands that the Virgin did a miracle. So he really was in two places at the same time. As for the Muslims, we can see here, I wrote about this on my blog, and I said that they were not stereotyped like we saw many times in cases of war. Among the Muslims, there's always some black character, as you can see on the top, and a Christian. This proves what I said before. It was not a question of religion. There's another Christian here. Medieval aristocracy fight each other and made arrangements with neighboring kingdoms, and it wouldn't matter if they were Muslims or not. This one I must thank for the last one, and this one I must thank a Galician comic scholar and critic Breixo Arguindei, who called my attention to this page and the last one, because sometimes people say this is not comics because a long time passes between panels. But here we can see a scaffold going down, and it's not much time had passed from panel to panel. What happens here is that the painter is painting a church, and the devil says to him, "Why do you paint me always that ugly?" What's interesting is that on the wall is ugly, but in person is ugly too, of course. And is furious, and the scaffold comes down. But the Virgin Mary does a miracle, and he doesn't fall. Well, I just brought this page because of the first panel, which is interesting because these are the scenes. Well, we have here. He becomes a leper because he had bad habits, and we see the bad habits here. Playing dice, of course, and it's interesting that they lost their clothes. What's a bit not very logic is that both lost their clothes, but I don't know. We have also the wine skin, and women, of course, sex workers. I suppose that he repents, and then is saved by the Virgin. Another one here, and we see the same thing with playing dice, and he has patched clothes. He's not naked, but he has patched clothes, so dice is always a bad idea. And the wine skin also, and the women. The devil is here waiting to catch souls. And look at the end of the women, the woman here in the purse of the man. So because of this gesture, I brought here a painting by Jan Steen in the 17th century, which is the same gesture. So we have here a very old antecedent to this, and another one by French painter, which escapes my name. The name escapes me right now, but that's okay. Georges Latour, that's the name. Well, this one is one of the songs in honor of the Virgin Mary. So this is not a story. I don't know if it's just honoring the Virgin Mary. And this is the interesting part, this last panel. And this was written in verse. This were to be songs, of course. And I found on the internet, on the Oxford University has a site dedicated to the Cantigas, and I found a translation in English. I couldn't do it, of course. My English, as you can see, is not so good. I'm sorry for that. In the starry sky were made of, if the starry sky were made of parchment, and all the sea, great as it is. Here I didn't agree with the translation because the original poem says it is proven that it is big. So they didn't know. In another cantiga, I saw someone saying the little sea, which is the Mediterranean, and the sea that surrounds us. So the idea they had is that they were like an island, surrounded by water. But there was a little sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and a larger one. They have no idea what it was, but it is proven, they say, that it was large. But I will start again. If the starry sky were made of parchment, which we see here, parchment, of course, and all the sea, great as it is, were ink, and the sea is ink, and a learned man were to live forever, the greater part of her praise would still remain to be written. And so this is nothing else but a visual poem, a visual, how can I say it, a visual metaphor, a visual metaphor. So the sky is parchment, and it comes from the sky, and the sea is ink. This one is truly awful, and if you remember the warning I read before, I'm going to read again. We now recognize that brutalizing and murdering a woman is not an insignificant detail in the cosmic scheme of things. This refers to Cantiga 237, which I couldn't find an image, but 237 is too high a number, so I don't know if a comics page was made. A woman is raped and murdered, and what the writers thought was what an incredible thing to do. The Virgin Mary doesn't bother with that. The only thing she wants is to give her a last sacrament so she could go to heaven. And that's exactly what happens here. A strange thing here is that this man's only crime was to go to Seville, while Seville was on Muslim hands. So this is a hate crime, basically. Maybe they thought that he was friends with the Muslims, and they tried to murder him, throwing rocks at him, or a spearing, using a spear, or finally but the Virgin was always protecting him. But finally the cut his throat, and the Virgin permits him to, even with his throat cut, permits him to talk and to be well, to confess his sins, to permit him to go to heaven. Finally dies, but the Virgin doesn't permit the birds and the dogs to eat his flesh. Well, what I can say about this, what I can say is that to Christians at this time, this life wasn't that important. What was important was to go to heaven on the other life. So the Virgin permits him to. What the terrible thing was not to die. The terrible thing was to die without confessing his sins. And that's what the person who wrote the text perhaps didn't understand, and did a reading, today's reading, an anachronistic reading. Here is another interesting device, because we think of comics with the next panel, the second panel. In the second panel, thing happened after the first panel. That's how we read. When there are two armies facing each other, it's always like this. One faces from left to right, the other from right to left. But here, what happens first was the second panel, because we see here a crossbow, and this soldier uses his crossbow, which finds this man's eye. So it's impossible to be here before he shots his crossbow. So we have here something we say we read from left to right. Most of the times, yes, but sometimes it doesn't happen like that. Of course, the Virgin Mary saves his eye and is good as new. I just brought this image because of the perspective. It is not. We have here the perspective of the what I call the transparent wall, but here the transparent wall doesn't exist, and the perspective is a bit strange, but it's okay. What happens here is that the girl drowns, and the parents are there looking at it, and but the Virgin saves the girl. This is a very interesting example, and I thank again Brescio for calling my attention to this. Well, King Alfonso went to hunt with a falcon. Then the falcon goes to attacks the heron. The heron falls into the water, and the man goes into the river, but he almost drowns, and then King Alfonso says pleads the Virgin, and the man is saved. This is read from left to right, but the last two panels, it's from right to left. And the interesting part is that the falcon gives us a clue as to how to read, because his ear is really, it's like an arrow, of course, an arrow from left to right, and an arrow from right to left. I call your attention for the hat of the king, which has the lion and the castle. And this hat exists today, or another like this one, as you can see here. This was on the tomb of Alfonso's son, who died 19 years old. Alfonso's son Fernando de la Cerda, and they could recover the hat and the sword of Fernando, and many other things that were there in this tomb. I just brought this one to show a bullfighting, but this bullfighting is a bit strange because they just throw darts to the poor bull. So here the miracle is that this man was passing, and the Virgin puts the bull to sleep, and then the bull is tamed, is not dangerous anymore. Here is the same thing. Well, this priest had a lover, and when he's in the love is in two places at the same time in the same panel. So, but this happens many times in which a column is, as I said, a gutter, another gutter. So this is two panels in one panel, and what happens here is that he's here with his lover, but he sees through the window, he sees the church glowing, and he repents. But then the lover says, "Oh well, let's just shut the window, and that's it." But the Virgin puts a wind, and another. That's the reading is again from right to left. So the wind opens the window, and he sees the church glowing again, and he repents, and he enters an order, a religious order. But what's interesting here is the wind from right to left. And this is to show that this is to show that well, this is an army of Muslims, as you see here, and this one says you can attack the town, a town, because there are no soldiers there, or there aren't many. And it's interesting to see how all these things were done. They had tents in all that, and really they aren't many, of course, but the Virgin put many soldiers. What the text says that they were white as snow or crystal. And so the Muslim king says, "You said that there were not many soldiers in the city, and now there are many." And the man says, they were put there by the Virgin Mary. And he goes back. They always thank the Virgin Mary for their miracle, the Virgin Mary's miracle. Well, this was the Código Rico, and now I just have four more images. This is from the Florence Codex, and we can see here the page wasn't obviously finished, and you can see they started with the gutters, and here they did the background. They did the background without the characters. And here is the drawing, before being, this is a story about Adam and Eve. This is a drawing before completion. That's why the Florentine Codex is interesting, because it wasn't finished, and we can see how things were done. This is the last one, I suppose, also from the Florentine Codex, and the only thing I found interesting are they are constructing a cathedral, and here comes wood and stone, and we can see they working here doing mortar. This is the sculpture, the crane, the scaffolding, and the priest tells the mass, and but the cathedral isn't completed yet, and something falls from, but as nobody is hurt, it's considered a miracle, of course. The Virgin wasn't. I suppose the Virgin wasn't. The draftsman didn't draw the Virgin here. And that's it. This is one of. This was one of the. Okay, that was one of the songs on YouTube. but since suppose you can't hear it, so that's what I have to say today.
Well, thank you so much, Domingos. That was incredible. That was a wonderful presentation. It was so rich. There was there was so much information there. It's interesting because the based actually on your research and what you've written a little bit about and what you've written online, I should say. I've occasionally just sort of I would say very casually looked into the Cantigas de Santa Maria and as a subject, and certainly something I'm interested in researching more. And one of the things that I find is that it's such a rich text overall. It has so many different kinds of information that it seems like people go to it for a lot of different kinds of information. Obviously, for people who are interested in medieval music of that period, it's a very important text. For people who are interested, I think, as you demonstrated very well in just learning more about what daily life was like during that time period that's very hard to imagine now. That book is considered to be exceptionally rich in the details of daily life, and you demonstrated that quite well. I love the way you use the zooming to kind of bring us into the panels and look at some of those details. But and then there is this whole other dimension, which is that exactly as you demonstrated, we can read them as comics. And unlike the madrigals and the other details of daily life, I think so far Domingos and Domingos, I should say, and the peer who you referred to, and maybe some other peers, are the only people who I know of who have really been researching this text in those terms. So I mean, it's really I think very important original research, and I think very, very helpful to see what you've been able to share with us here. I'm putting a link, by the way, in the chat right now. This is the link online where you can see the entirety of the Codice Rico. That was the text, the not the unfinished one, but the other one that about 4/5 of Domingos's images came from. And unfortunately, you can only download the images one page at a time. One quick question I wanted to ask you, Domingos, just as a point of fact, about how many of those like 6-panel illuminated pages are there in this text?
Oh, you caught me off guard there.
Oh, I'm sorry. But I think I got the impression that it was maybe in the order of maybe 100-ish or something like that. It's not like 12 or
well, there are 195 pages. 195 pages. I'm not going to say that there are 195, but maybe there are more even than that. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Well, I think the Codice Rico is about, I think, what, like 500, 600 pages, and it seems like maybe every 4th page, something like that, is a comics page, something.
Well, it's here.
Wow, that's incredible. I've never seen a facsimile of it.
It's incredibly heavy.
Oh, well, don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt yourself.
But I would
you.
like to share.
Wow, amazing, incredible, beautiful.
This has the story and
Yeah,
then the comic.
Yeah.
But
Great.
also music,
Yeah.
let's see if I can find. Yeah. Also music, as you can see.
Yeah. One question I wanted to ask too is just for, I was looking at that website online just a little bit in preparation, and often it seems that there might be like a page of text on one side and then
Yes.
the comic with the captions on the other side. When we're looking at a spread like that, is that does the text on the other side also tell in fuller detail the story, the same story?
That's exactly what happens. Yes.
Okay. But one thing I was wondering too is if you were to just read only the captions, would that be enough information to understand the narrative, or do you rely on the paratext,
Well,
the sort of fuller explanation on the other side?
some stories are more complicated than others, but usually they're not that difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Even because this is very simple. Something happens, and then the Virgin does a miracle, and that's it. You know.
Yeah. It's kind of like Little Nemo in Slumberland, except instead of falling out of bed, they pray to the Virgin, you know?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Which is also a very big book
Yeah,
by
true.
Tasha and Tasha. But this one is heavier because the stock, oh my God.
Yeah. Let's see. Now, you know, Austin, I was wondering if you would go ahead and ask your question. You posted a question about Charlotte Solomon. I was wondering, Austin, would you mind unmuting and asking that question?
Sure, I can ask. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I love the entire presentation, and thank you so much for giving it. I kind of wanted to just ask you a question that I've always wondered about Charlotte Solomon's work. One of my favorite people to ever make a work of comic art or whatever you want to call it. And I was curious to hear your thoughts about the work as a whole. I'm so interested in the transition from the beginning of her work, where there's wax paper, there's text on the wax paper, and then as she continues on with the work, and as far as I know, she's working in isolation as to influences from other examples of comic art. I guess people have speculated that maybe she drew influence from William Blake, but I don't think that's been proven or anything. Some introduction speculates on that to one of the editions of her work. So I'm just curious, have you noticed, did you take note how as her narrative progresses, she starts putting you know, the text and the dialogue directly on the canvas, to the degree that it starts off as almost these more illustrations in the first section of the work. You know, they're painted, but they almost illustrate the text. And then as she goes forward, it's just rapid back and forth dialogue, it's conversations. You know, it resembles not comics that we're familiar with, but it really does resemble comics language. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, or just thoughts on the work in general, because I do think it's, I'm glad. I think that work is gaining in stature and love and appreciation, but it's still very underappreciated. So I'm curious on your thoughts on it in general.
Well, I think it's a very important piece of work, of course. But it was we have to consider the conditions in which it was done. I'm not very familiar with. Maybe you know more about art or theater than me, but the way I see it, it was done in conditions, awful conditions. Of course, she was running from the Nazis, and I suppose in Italy. But yeah, it's a very important piece of work, of course.
And I think there's an aspect of that that Austin's alluding to that maybe you've observed too, where when one begins researching these things that are kind of like comics, perhaps, or are comics, however one identifies them, but coming from other areas, there is almost this sense of people kind of inventing comics over and over again, you know, but in different ways. You know, so I think maybe that's something too. I mean, I think, you know, even, you know, it's like, as you were pointing out with the Cantigas, you know, there are some sequences where, you know, they're a little more flexible about things going from left to right or right to left or whatever. And it's almost like looking at the earliest newspaper comic strips where the artists themselves seem to be learning storytelling through trial and error, I guess. I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that, about just kind of the development of that work? Does it seem like there were, I mean, and that's actually another interesting thing. I mean, the Cantigas are so different from many other illuminated manuscripts I've seen. Have you seen many other works that are as interesting as that from the perspective we're looking at it?
Yes, a few years ago there was a big exhibition in France called La BD avant la BD, comics before comics. They had a very rich site. It was at the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris, I suppose, or something like that. They had a very interesting site that it still exists, but most of it disappeared. But it still exists. It still can be. We can see some things there, but not as much as it was. And the examples were many. But someone said that the Cantigas were what, I think it was Thierry Grunstein who said that the Cantigas were what he knew from medieval comics that most resembled what we call comics in the 20th century or the 20th.
Well, and that's also such an interesting thing, because as you said, like it's, going back to the beginning of your talk, we sort of see like the constant redefinition of comics, or, the constant changing of a historical landmark, right? Or and certainly Thierry Schmolderan in his book is called The Births of Comics, the many multiple births of comics. I mean, it almost feels like comics are always being born or something. But it's interesting.
I wrote a text and I called it the origins myth, because it is a myth. Anyone can say comics started here. Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because nothing happens when we see something like the Cantigas existing in the 13th century. What can we say? Well, there was something I want to say about this. Some people told, well, because I'm not the first one to say that the Cantiga existed. That some years ago, people went to the Altamira, the cave paintings and all that. But the people are accused of wanting to give importance to comics, to the lowly comic. That's not my intention at all. I just think that comics can be many things. And if you narrow the definition, the problem if you narrow the definition is that artists can't get creative, can't create outside those boundaries. The boundaries are too strict. That's what I want to say.
No, that's absolutely true. And, even when I teach students comics, or teach about comics, we learn about these definitions. And then I always, first of all, I make sure they always know there's more than one. And second of all, and I also remind them, especially because I mostly teach art students, and like I always remind them, don't forget, it's never the artist's job to follow a definition. That's not what artists do. Absolutely, in fact, the opposite. So yeah, I think that's very important. And also too, the other thing, and this is also sometimes a hard thing to grapple with, and I don't know if you have any feelings about it, but sometimes when we look at this material, there's also a sense too that it's hard to understand how the reader at the time would have read it, like how, someone who lives in a medieval culture, and sees most of their visual material, in a very different way than we do, and understand, obviously, as we saw in the content, understands the world in a different way. Like
completely.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Some things are very unfortunate, of course. Anti-Semitism and hate crimes. It's not. What the world that exists in the Cantigas is not very pleasant.
Yeah, right. Of course. Paul Karazik posted a question about the Florentine Codex. I think is that work also similarly narrative, the comics that are finished in there?
It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. The problem is that it was dispersed. Some pages disappeared.
Mhm.
Instead of 195 pages, it has 102. Many stories aren't there. But I remember you that there are two more books. The Book of the Musicians, which is not has some illustrations. It's an illuminated manuscript, but no sequence of panels. It's another one only with text. So there are 400, as I said, there are 419 stories.
One question I wanted to ask, this, maybe you talked about, you gave an overview of some of the material that you survey in your book, The Reading Gaze. And when you've described that book and your work in general, one of the phrases that you use is from Pauline Kael, I think, right? I'm sorry, not Pauline Kael, but the idea of the expanded field, which comes from the idea of sculpture in the expanded field by Kraus.
Rosalind
right.
Kraus,
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Kraus's idea of the expanded field impacted your thinking.
Well, a lot, because well, it's exactly what I said before. If you narrow the definition, for example, I give you a very simple example. Why use India ink in the 21st century? No reason at all. I suppose India ink existed because the way comics were printed needed that, I suppose. So why become so attached to this particular way of doing things? I don't know. And as we know, artists since the 19th century started pushing boundaries of what art could be. And when Rosalind Kraus talks about sculpture in the 1970s, and the hole in the ground could be a sculpture, and that's it. The expanded field is that. It's picking what we have and expand the idea of what it can be.
So does anyone else have a question they want to ask while we have Domingos here? I know it's very, very late in Portugal.
It's
But
okay.
we could take maybe
It's okay.
one more if anyone wants to raise a hand and ask a question. Who's that? Did somebody say something? No? Well, let me just ask you one other question, Domingos. How did you originally, do you remember how you originally came across the Cantigas de Santa Maria? Was it something that you were you seeking this kind of work, like medieval, comics like exposition and medieval manuscripts, or did it come to you some other way?
I can't remember really.
Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah.
But this book may be this magazine. It's Galicia. It's from Galicia. Because the Cantigas were written in Old Galician, so in Portuguese. So I must add that I can't read it. I really can't read. I understand the words, but that Gothic writing is very difficult for me to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an old language, I'm sure. What I mean,
I understand perfectly the 700 years passed, but I can understand most of what is written, but I can't understand what my problem is with the way the letters are designed in
I see.
Old French Gothic, and it's
Yeah.
difficult. I understand some words, but most of them I don't understand.
Yeah.
But this is from a Galician magazine about literature, and there was an article here from Breixo, which I mentioned,
Mhm.
about the Cantigas. But maybe I knew the Cantigas before this, but
Mhm.
I can
Oh,
pinpoint.
I was curious. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Domingos. We really appreciate it. This has really been a wonderful and rich presentation. I mean, this is, I think, the kind of thing I always want to see, someone, who's really kind of done the work and looked into the material and can come back and really not just talk about it, but draw our attention to details. And it was really a truly, truly wonderful presentation. But before I let everyone go, I just want to say that next week our guest will be Stan Mack. You may know Stan Mack from Real Life Funnies. There's a collection of that material from Fantagraphics. So Stan Mack will be appearing in conversation with Danny Fingeroth. And this is going to be a rare live event. So it'll be live at the New School. The information is on our website. I would imagine that they will likely also be simultaneously live streaming it, but that information will be available on our website. I have posted in the chat a link to both the site that has the entirety of the Codice Rico that we were looking at, as well as that expo, the BD avant la BD, which I've also definitely found some interesting things on in the past. And I'm a big fan of ancient websites that continue to hang around at stable URLs. Thank you again, Domingos, for joining us from Portugal, 6 time zones away. And thanks a lot, everyone, for being here. Good night, everyone. Thank you again.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
It was my pleasure.